Mr. President, there's no doubt that the election we just went through was a combative one. Emotions ran high on both sides, and they're still running. But this is hardly the first time that this has happened in American history, and it won't be the last. Take the election of 1800, for example. That campaign between John Adams and Thomas Jefferson was no picnic either. It was emotional, hard-fought, and full of partisan attacks. Each side alleged the other would bring about ruin to our young nation. In his inaugural address, the new president, Thomas Jefferson, explicitly referenced the contentious process the nation had just come through. But then he said the following, and I quote, "But this," meaning the election, "being now decided by the voice of the nation, announced according to the rules of the Constitution, all will, of course, arrange themselves under the will of the law and unite in common efforts for the common good." Let me repeat that, Mr. President. All will arrange themselves under the will of the law and unite in common efforts for the common good, end quote. That's the key, Mr. President. That's what separates our nation from tyrannies and other oppressive forms of government. In the United States, we may have contentious elections, but at the end of the day, we accept the results and we move forward for the common good. That doesn't mean we give up fighting for what we believe in, of course, but we fight within the law, not outside of it. Our form of government endures because as a nation we respect the rule of law. But there's another thing to remember about elections, Mr. President, not just the obligation that we have to accept the results and move forward, but something else. What President Obama reminded us of the day after the election, that we are all Americans, that at the end of the day, we're all on the same side. And I quote, "Everyone is sad when their side loses an election. But the day after, we have to remember that we're actually all on one team. This is an intramural scrimmage. We're not Democrats first, we're not Republicans first, we are Americans first, we are patriots first." End quote. That's from President Obama the day after the election. Well, we are indeed, Mr. President, because we are Americans who believe in God-given freedoms. What unites us is greater than what divides us. In the coming days, I look forward to working with my fellow Americans from both parties to meet the challenges that are facing our nation. Mr. President, if there's one thing that this election made clear, it's that this economy is not working for American families. In one CNN exit poll last Tuesday, 63% of voters rated the economy as poor. That result shouldn't surprise anyone. The last few years have been tough for American workers. Job creation has been sluggish. Wages have been stagnant. Economic growth has lagged far behind the pace of other recoveries. And opportunities for workers have been few and far between. It's no wonder so many hardworking Americans feel like they've been left behind. To the millions of American workers who are discouraged by this economy, I want to say this. We hear you. Republicans hear you. And I promise you we are going to act. Growing our economy is going to be our #1 priority next Congress. There are a number of things that we can do to get the economy healthy again. We can reform our tax code to reduce the burden on American families and businesses. Right now, our nation has the highest corporate tax rate in the developed world. More and more American companies are focusing their business operations overseas because the tax situation is so much better abroad. And that means that American jobs are going overseas with them. We've lost our competitive edge in an increasingly global economy. Instead of pushing corporations out of our country, we should bring our nation's corporate tax rate in line with those of other countries to keep more jobs here in the United States. Another big thing we can do is repeal some of the burdensome government regulations that are weighing down businesses. While some government regulations are necessary, every administration has to remember that regulations have consequences. The more resources individuals and businesses spend complying with government regulations, the less they have available to focus on the growth and innovation that drive our economy and create new opportunities for American workers. Over the past 8 years in particular, businesses have had to devote far too many resources to complying with government regulations, and that's left them with few resources to dedicate to growing and creating jobs. Another thing we need to do is address our national debt, which has nearly doubled over the past 8 years. And that debt, Mr. President, is a drag on our economy. It slows growth and reduces economic opportunity. It's time to get our government back on a budget. Another way we can help lift the burden on American families is by repealing and replacing Obamacare. The President's health care law is broken. The promise of lower premiums and affordable health care has given way to the reality of giant premium increases and massive deductibles. It's time to give the American people health care reform that actually works. Mr. President, another priority of the new Republican Congress will be national security. Americans are rightfully worried about the threat posed by terrorist groups like ISIS, which has spread violence and devastation not only in the Middle East, but across Europe and beyond. We've even experienced ISIS-inspired terrorist attacks on American soil in San Bernardino and Orlando. More recently, there were attempted bombings in New York and New Jersey and an ISIS-inspired stabbing attack in Minnesota. Republicans are committed to defeating ISIS abroad and keeping Americans safe here at home. We intend to make sure that our law enforcement agencies and our nation's military have the tools that they need to defeat terrorist threats. And we will make sure that our military men and women remain the best equipped and the most prepared fighting force on the planet. Another key component to keeping Americans safe is securing our borders. We must have secure borders and policies that encourage legal immigration while discouraging illegal immigration. And then there are the other priorities we need to address: confirming a Supreme Court nominee who will judge based on the law and the Constitution, protecting religious liberty, encouraging investment in our nation's infrastructure, and more. To all the Americans who voted for change in this election, to every worker who has felt left behind in this economy, I want to say again, we hear you. Republicans hear you. We're going to fight for your priorities here in Washington. We are committed to earning the trust that you place in us on Election Day. Mr. President, the election is over, and it's time to take up the work of governing the nation. Our nation is facing many challenges, and it's time for all of us, Democrat and Republican, liberal and conservative, to unite to address them. If we work together, I firmly believe we will once again be able to say, as President Ronald Reagan once said, America's best days are yet to come. Our proudest moments are yet to be, and our most glorious achievements are just ahead. Mr. President, I yield the floor.